Hi, everyone. Again, this is Anton Roeger with APC. Just wanted to get with everybody today, and our topics today are specific on search optimization and also using the Polygon tool. There's a chat box that should be on your screen or question and answers that if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask, and we will do our best to answer them during the presentation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and do an example of a relatively simple one and then a more complicated one to show you how the search criteria affects, basically your goal is to get the most relevant comps and use that in the analysis. So we're going to start simply a new chart. So let's run a new chart here. So this one's working out of the Charleston Regional MLS. And what we're going to do is just select a broader band of search criteria. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to analyze a property that from ours we've already added this property in here. It's just 123 Main Street. So we've already run a property, we've added it to our property list. Now this is the search criteria, and then every MLS might have a different set of search criteria depending on the MLS. But for this one in Charleston, here's the categories that we're allowed to choose from. So what I'm going to do is just do a broader based search to show everybody, the influence of the data in the system. So if I choose residential, so we'll stay away from rental. So we're just going to do a residential value analysis. Under property type, so I'm going to choose single family detached. Let's say this is a single family detached at 123 Main Street. So obviously on a search criteria, if you have an attached property, whether it's a condo or a townhome, you want to stick to attached. If you have a detached townhome, so this is a category that really should always be selected because you should be narrowing down to attached or detached at least. Year built, and again, I'm going to start with a wide search criteria at the moment. So year built, again, we'll come back to this, but if you have an older historic home, it can be, relevant that you should stick to older year builds, or if you have a new construction, maybe you should stick to the newer year builds. But for this, I'm going to skip this for the moment. Subdivision, so I'm going to select the subdivision from the MLS list here. So this subdivision is called Bell Hall. So I'll add it to the list, and you can add multiple subdivisions if you want, not a requirement to have multiple ones. And then price range, again, just to show you a broad search, I'm not going to enter price range and I'm not going to enter square footage at the moment. Zip code would come into play if there's no subdivision and we wanted to do an analysis with a zip code and go straight to a map search. We could do it that way. Date range, we'll leave it as a year. So you can see it defaults to 1 year. We'll leave it as a year for the moment. Again, this is all part of the search criteria. So I'm fairly wide open on my search criteria. I've just said single family detached and Bell Hall. So when you see what populates just with that open search criteria, I have 74 closed sales, 8 pending and 13 active. And you can see on the map where everything populates on here. Now, our minimum requirement for closed sales is 7 to do the analysis on it. And that's a statistical reason why the 7 is required. So if you ended up not getting 7, and let's say we had 5 closed sales off the search criteria, the first thing I would do is open up the time frame as much as possible to try to get the 7. But obviously this situation, we have 74 closed sales. Optimum, if you can get 12, 15, maybe up to 18 or 20 closed sales, that's probably, the good zone to hit for analysis. 74 shows me that I have too many closed comps that are probably not relevant to my subject property. So there's a few things that you can do to optimize your search. So the first thing I would do is like, okay, well, if there's 74 closed in a year, then I probably don't need a year's worth of data. Let's stick to more recent sales. So if I just want to go back 6 months, 6 months from today would be November 27th. So we're going to do this in a step process. So if I just go back to 6 months and now I hit search, so again, the only thing I've changed is the date range. So now I've gone down to 34 closed sales. So I went from 74 to 34. So going down to 34 is a more reasonable number. And we still, remember, we just did a date on the closed sale, so we still have the 13 active and 8 pendings. So it's getting more reasonable, but it still probably has some comps that are not quite as relevant. So we can go, let's choose year built. So let's say this subject property was built in, let's just pick a year, let's say 1996. So if it was built in 1996, maybe if I'm not familiar with the neighborhood, I can go, let's go 5 years around. So if I go 5 years around, I can simply go here and put the year built in. So you can see I'm taking my bigger group and I'm narrowing down the comps to get the most relevant ones. So if I hit search again, what it's going to populate for me, now it shows me I have 23 closed sales. So I limited, the number of closed sales from the 34 to the 23. And I see a question here. When you go from 12 months to 6 months, don't you lose the seasonality predictive ability? I'll share with you in a minute, kind of how that's affecting the seasonality, and I can show you how that happens. But it is being calculated whether you use the 12 months is a different calculation than 6 months, because the 12 months you're reading the whole season, where the 6 months you're reading a window of time. So I'll show you once we get to the analytics tab how that affects seasonality. On the year built here, so we show 1991 to 2001. Now we're down to 23 closed comps. Now again, it still is maybe more than I want, and I've not really narrowed anything else down. And if I run this chart, so let's just say, okay, I'm still learning something about this neighborhood. I'm not an experienced agent. I'm still learning some information about this. So I'm down to 23. If I hit generate chart, what it's going to produce for me, and it's very easy to go back, is it produces for me an analysis that looks like this. So my subject property that I'm analyzing is at 1,850 square feet. Well, I noticed really quickly, in the midpoint price is, in the 400s, is kind of where my comps are at. I noticed very quickly that I have houses that are significantly larger in size. And this one's almost 3,600 square feet. And this one's 3,000 square feet, but I also know I have them significantly different in price. So it's not this subject property that I'm evaluating. These comps around it are probably the more relevant comps than a house that's over twice as big or over twice as expensive. So if I got to this point, I might say, well, I don't need those large houses here, and I also don't need the prices. So let's just do one cut of square footage here. So if I look at square footage, let me just take everything under, let's say 2,200 square feet. So it's very simple to go back to modify the search. And now if I say, okay, well, let me limit square footage as well. If I just say, show me everything under 2,200 square feet in this neighborhood, again, going back 6 months, with the year built 1991 to 2001. So now I'm down to 3 active, 4 pending, 19 closed. So we're starting to hone in on having the most relevant comps. So again, if I generate the chart, then what it shows to me is that with this new set of data that is essentially single family detached in Bell Hall, 1991 to 2001, 6 months of data, and under 2,200 square feet. So if I take that specific search criteria, sorry, I think my internet hung up here for a second. 1 second. There we go. So, sorry, let me do that again. So modify search. So if we go back and we said under 2,200 square feet, and I hit search, what it's going to produce for me is it's limiting that data. So now we're down to 19 closed. If I generate the chart, what it's producing for me is a more narrowed in or focused on the most relevant set of comps. So now you can see we're dealing with comps that are around the square footage and around that price point. So this is a much better reflection of the set of data that we're looking for. So again, from an aspect of what we've honed in and zoomed in from the original set of data and we're picking the more relevant comps. Now, with 19 closed comps, you still have more than enough to satisfy. So what you can do is you can still go back and modify the search, but also there might be some comps on here, and I don't know this specific property, but let's say this property here is a foreclosure. Remember, you still have the ability from within the chart, the list, or the map to delete other comps. So let's say this house is not a relevant one, you can simply go delete it from the list. So as soon as I delete it from the list, it's still going to recalculate everything based off the new set of comps, eliminating that one comp. So from an aspect of it's taking away the one comp that's relevant from the list. Sorry, I think I just have a bad internet connection here, so let me do this again. So if I delete the one comp, what it's going to do, it's going to produce for me the new set of data without that one comp included. So you can actually narrow down further with those set of comps here. So just for an example, I wanted to show you how you can start to narrow down from what we had 74 to now we're down to 18. So these 18 data points have a much more specific relevance to the subject property. And you can tell by your estimated market value range. So you can see here the range of value that we're giving is roughly about $6,000, right? So just for an example, if I go back, so let's go back, and if I say, okay, let's eliminate, and just to show you how all this affects it, let's eliminate everything we had, and let's go back to the 1 year. So I'm going backwards now, but just as a demonstration. So if I go back 1 year, and we go back to what we originally had, so we had the residential single family. So here's the 74 closed comps. So if I were to run analysis with all of these comps and I generate the chart, again, this might work for farming a neighborhood to see what the neighborhood is doing as a whole, but you're this little house here and you have all these other comps in the mix that might not be relevant for your analysis. You can see what's happened here is now we almost have a $20,000 market value range. And the reason why that has happened is because you've picked some very distinct and different set of comps with much higher end properties, maybe with views. It's a different animal that you're dealing with up here than down here. So it's, if you can narrow down to those set of comps, and conversely, if you're evaluating a property up here, use these set of comps that are in that same area and same price point. So you can tell how focused your comp set is getting by how wide your market value range is. So this might be interesting for farming a neighborhood. You can say, well, this entire neighborhood, here's a year's worth of data. And just while we're on that topic of the year, so this is 1 year of data, 1 year of data. The analytics tab from a seasonality aspect, what it's doing is it's taking any closed comps. So for this example, we have the 74. So those 74 closed comps, it's relevant saying compared to those other ones, we are in a positive part of the season. So you can see the date range, and on the chart, we show what date we're doing the analysis on, which is today. So what it's doing is saying for today's date, compared to the 74 closed dates, we're looking at analysis of a positive seasonality adjustment. So if, from the question earlier, if I were to limit this to 6 months, and again, this is the same set of data. So if I were to limit it to 6 months, it's going to do a different analysis of the seasonality. So now we only have the 34 closed comps in 6 months. So what we're doing on the analytics, once we get down to 6 months, is we're saying, okay, that's actually a bigger adjustment with the 6 months of data. And the reason why is because when we look at this here, we're saying, well, a lot of these closed November, December, January, February, they close at the low of the traditional seasonal market for this specific MLS. So we're making a bigger adjustment because we're not including the same time frame of those other closed comps. So you can see any closed comp that you alter is going to alter the seasonality as well as the market conditions. So it's reading off of that. So your search criteria will affect all the other calculations at the same time. So that's an example of a specific neighborhood. But just to show you, I'm going to do another example here, and let's just for fun, let's do attach this time. So we're going to do a new analysis here, and just for the sake of this demonstration, let's still say it's called 123 Main Street. But let's go into a historical area. So a vastly different set of comps. So let's go to, in Charleston, there's an area that's south of Broad Street, which is downtown, and it's actually just called South of Broad. So if I do South of Broad, and my house that I'm doing the analysis on is South of Broad, and I simply select South of Broad, and remember we did single family attached, and let's go back, and just for default, let's go back 1 year. So if I go back 1 year on the search, so all I've done is attached South of Broad, any price point, any square footage, and if I hit search, what it's going to produce for me, it's going to show how many comps in that area. So here's South of Broad in Charleston. So this is the demarcation line is Broad Street, which you can see right here. And it has 34 closed comps, 30 active, and 4 pending. So this is the set of data that's pulled from. Now, again, as an agent who might not be as experienced, let's say I just want to analyze all 34 of those closed comps. If I hit generate chart, it's going to produce for me, the results with those 34 closed comps included in the analysis. So you can see, what type of diagram I get. Again, it's only, a very specific set of, it's a very wide set of criteria. I've just had everything South of Broad attached. No price point, no year built, just show me everything. So this is a good way to see how the market is behaving overall. Maybe not the best way for pricing a specific house. And you can see the range of value. Right now, it's at $75,000. It's a fairly large range of value. Now, if I want to dive down and say, okay, well, maybe if my house is, at 1,850 square feet, maybe I cut it off around 2,500 square foot, and I want to look at the smaller ones. Again, I can start to narrow down that search criteria. So I could say, okay, well, let's just limit it at 2,500 square feet. We don't need to go bigger than that. And let's say it was built in the late 1800s. So maybe I do the historic area. So let's just say 1925. And if it was built in 1875, let's take 50 years around it. So I want to find some historic properties in that area there. Let's say our subject property was built in 1875. I can do the analysis again. We're still doing 1 year, but we've just limited the square footage. So now I'm down to 15 closed comps. So essentially, I've started to narrow down the criteria based off of a historic property. And you can see on the map where these properties lie. So again, attach, what I can do is if I hit generate chart, it's going to populate the 15 closed comps. And now you can see what's happening is we have a much more narrowed set of criteria. And even with a very historic type of area, now we've also narrowed down our price range. So even though these are vastly different properties, based off of this, nobody put pictures in that one. That's maybe not the best example. Here's 38 King Street. So they have the pictures in here. So it shows the property, but these properties, you can also see the bands of prices that, think about this as consumer demand. So here's what buyers are willing to pay for attached properties south of Broad that were built between 1825 and 1925. And no offense to maybe these sellers, but hopefully they have something hyper unique that's going to bring these values to them. But you can see the market, there's 15 closed comps in 1 year. There's 12 months of inventory because there's 15 active. So we're closing 15 in a year. We have 15 active. We have 12 months of inventory. So this is a much more relevant set of data than the first one that I showed to you. So it's a way to narrow down based off of year build. You can, if you'd like. There was I saw another question here. We just recently added this enable wildcard search. So this enable wildcard search, if I do this, it will choose, and I type in a neighborhood like South, it's going to choose, and I just type South, it's going to choose any subdivision that has the letters that incorporate south in it. So it's if you put Hall, it's going to include Hall Point and Bell Hall. So that's just a search criteria that allows more subdivisions to be selected if you need that same word in that subdivision. But we know this is called South of Broad here, so I don't really need to enable it in this search. So it was just a tool that was requested by some of our users to be able to search their neighborhoods. Now, just for an example, we can also, if South of Broad, if we're like, well, that's a decent set of data, but I'd like to have some other areas included in that, you can do other areas like French Quarter is another area in that same location of town. We have Ansonboro. So we're picking up additional neighborhoods. Again, same year built, same attached property built between 1825 and 1925. So if I go to the search criteria on here, what it's going to do is going to populate these other subdivisions or other subsections of downtown Charleston. So now when I look at the map, so this area is South of Broad, this area is the French Quarter, and this is Ansonboro. So as an agent, if I can, and this is, I'm trying to include your map search on here. So on the map search, let's say, well, you know, my area of town is more this area here. So you can enable the polygon around. So if you want to, you simply, and I'll start over again. So if you, here's your map search. If I zone in and I say, well, you know, my subject property is right here. If I enable the polygon, it's very simply, I enable polygon, and I click the first point, second point, you complete it until you have your polygon. So now within the polygon, the markers that are showing up, you have the 10 active, 1 pending, 13 closed. So if those are the set of criteria you want to use, you simply hit generate chart. And again, it's going to produce for you what is included in that set of data. So this consists of this mapped area that I have. So you can use the polygon tool to also narrow down your search criteria. So it's not just with your, you know, your list that you can pick from, but you can also, you know, add all of those features on, you know, all those additional criteria on there. And now this is a more relevant search for this mapped area of town. So you can see, and these are very historic, unique properties. And if you say, well, I want to have more of the same year built, you can simply say, okay, well, if it's 1875, I could choose 1850 to 1900. So now I'm narrowing down the year built. And if I go hit search, it's going to basically populate less properties because we squeeze it in. And you can see I've basically over specified, because now I've gone down to here and I only have 5 closed comps in a year. So I've over specified my criteria because there's not that many properties built in those year built. So I either need to open up my square footage, I need to open up the year built again. And just to show you how different the comps can be, let's say I have a newer construction. So if I go with these same areas and I have one built in, you can start from 1950 and let's say to 2000. And again, this is just, if your condo is built in 1975, so now here I have 7 closed sales, 3 pending, 12 active. So we're altering the year built to reflect, you know, what's available in those year builds, but we still have to maintain the number of closed comps. So again, you can, and if I generate the chart, now this is selecting those 3 neighborhoods with that type of criteria. Here's results. So again, anything you're doing is consumer demand for your search criteria, and it's the easiest way to look at it. And you can see the 3 under contract, 1, 2, 3, and then you can see where all the actives are. This is consumer demand for those areas of town with those year builds. So it's very user-friendly to keep, if you need to tweak your criteria, just go back and forth until you have a set of criteria that meets the minimum requirement for the number of comps, but also is still the most relevant comps in the search. You know, and again, it's a great way to analyze a neighborhood. So we'll start over again from getting away from downtown. So if I get away from downtown Charleston, which again, downtown Charleston is a very unique area with houses that are built in the 1700s and houses that are built in 2019, 2020. So it's a very unique area. So you definitely have to use some of that criteria to do your searches. So let's go back and do single family detached. And let's choose another neighborhood. So we're going to choose another very unique area. So this is Old Village, which is just across the river from downtown Charleston. So Old Village has historic houses and new construction at the same time. So if I wanted to do a full analysis, again, I'm just doing single family detached, Old Village. So a very wide open criteria. And it's okay to start with a wider criteria and narrow down to the most relevant one. So here we are, for those of you who aren't familiar with Charleston, we were just over here in downtown Charleston. Now we're crossing the harbor and coming over to the Mount Pleasant area. So this Old Village is a historic area in this part of town. And it shows you the criteria. So 28 active, 8 pending, and 30 closed. Again, I can generate a chart and show the area as a whole. Again, I don't recommend this method to price a specific house, but this shows all the activity in Old Village with all the search, all the criteria included. So if I had let's say I have a client that has a house that they built more recently, let's say 2014. And what I would do is say, okay, well, I don't really want to include the historic houses. So let's start narrowing down by year built. So if it's 2014, let me just do anything newer than 2010. And if I go to the search, again, 1 year of comps. If I go to the search, well, now I only have 6 closed sales. So maybe there's not that many newer construction homes, so maybe I narrowed it down a little bit too much. I can just open this up a little bit and say, okay, well, let's go back to 2000, because there's some homes over here that are also built in the 1800s. So let's just say newer construction. And if I open up to 2000, again, still 1 year. Okay, now I'm up to 8, which allows me to run the chart. Shows 10 active, 1 pending. So again, I can utilize the year built to narrow my criteria or expand my criteria. And now we show a chart of here's everything that's built after 2000 in Old Village. And you can see the variety of prices and sizes and homes, because some of these homes are on the harbor. So 202 Bank, this one, I don't know why they have that picture as their first picture, but that is on the harbor right there. So it shows as well as this one. So this shows, the variety of homes built in that area. Now, if that wasn't the search criteria I wanted, I can simply come back here. Again, let's eliminate year built, and let's focus on square footage. So let's say my house is around 2,000 square feet. So let's say under 3,000 square feet. And if we want to do that, we could also do year built. Let's say it's a newer construction, but I also want to limit the criteria. Let's just do 1980 and see what's in there. So again, it's so easy to change your criteria, see where your comps are, see where maybe your house is located, and pulling the most relevant ones from there. It's also a great way to, if you're, again, in a new area and you're not familiar with the area, let's pick another neighborhood. So we're going to do Hamlin Plantation. So if I do this area of town and I just do single family detached, let's get rid of year built for a second and do 1 year still on the search criteria. What is going to pop? So now I have 45 closed sales. So now going back to what's relevant, you can see a lot of activity in here, some in here and some in here. Well, where's your house? Where's the subject property within the neighborhood? So I just did the entire neighborhood, but let's say my house is in this section right here. Well, maybe I just simply do the Polygon search and come down and say, well, those are the most relevant ones. And I have enough to run the analysis. There's 3 active, 0 pending, and 7 closed. So if I run that analysis, then it populates, here's my chart. And again, if you're in a neighborhood, Hamlin Plantation was built in the early 2000s through maybe, most of the houses are through 2010. So these houses, when I go down to a map, they're all in a similar year built age. So by default, even though in my search criteria, I haven't put year built, by default, since this is a similar section by a similar builder, they are very relevant comps. So I can still do a map search to get the very specific set of comps, and it shows me the market conditions, it shows me where everything's at, and gives me a good analysis of this property, simply just doing a neighborhood and a map search. So you can see the variety of different ways to search and be able to populate your different set of charts and data. And again, every set of comps, no matter what you do it or how many times you do it, we're doing the analytics for the seasonality and the market conditions. All the days on market, sales price to list price, everything is specific to the set of comps that you ran. So again, getting to that point where you have the most relevant set of comps is the key for the agents to have the best analysis for their buyer or seller client. So that's most of what we wanted to cover today for optimizing your search. And I know that everybody from different areas of the country has places like Charleston that are hyper unique places of newer construction and maybe older historic houses. But it's your role to basically pick those most relevant ones to do the proper analytical work. And then don't be afraid to use the Polygon tool. We are working on a radius tool. So the radius tool, we have that in development. We should be populating that at the same time. I am doing, for those of you who are already in the system, we just released an investment analysis tool. So the investment analysis tool, we're doing a webinar on Friday at 2 o'clock. That's going to step through a whole investment analysis for your client, your investment client for long-term rentals. If they're purchasing a rental property, you can actually run the price on here for them, run the rental analysis, and it's going to do a full investment analysis for you. So join us on Friday at 2 o'clock, and we're going to do a webinar for that. And it's live. If you have access to it, if you log in, it will show up in your system as an investment analysis tool. I have another question on here. How did you use the same property address for the different areas? That was just part of the demo. I would, if I were doing different properties, I would go add a different property for each one. I was just using, because when you add a property, it's very simple. It's just tracking address, square footage. This is mostly for display purposes and not part of the full analysis. So it was mostly just for the demo. Just to be simple, I was using a similar property address and not having to create a new property. So that's most of what, please join us on Friday for that investment analysis tool. But again, if you have access to it, you can use it today. So feel free to play around with it. We're happy to answer any questions down here on our intercom button. So this allows us, this comes straight to us. But we'll run through the full investment analysis video, and it summarizes everything really with a minimal criteria to enter for you. If you already know the price of the house and you know the rental price of the house, it's worth your time just to enter a minimum set of data points, and it'll give you a full analysis for your client. So join us on Friday at 2 o'clock, and we appreciate everybody's time today. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.